Hi, so this is Group 5, Chapter 6, which is Written Response Assessment. And we have Gianna Humphrey, Aaliyah Miller, Kawan Pulliam, and myself, Caitlin Long. And this chapter had 5 objectives. So the first objective was plan a written response assessment. The second objective was develop short answer and extended written response items. Number 3 was develop 2 types of scoring guides, checklists, and task-specific rubrics. Number 4 was audit a written response assessment for quality. And number 5 was use written response assessments formatively with students. And so, kind of just to introduce the chapter, it talked about written response versus other test formats and how written responses are easy to develop. So sometimes we kind of rely on that, but that we really need to be thorough in our questions for students so that we can make sure that we are accurately measuring, what the student has learned and knowledge. So that was something that was really important. It also talked about 2 different types of written responses, short answer and extended written responses, and the differences and the purposes behind both. And so that's kind of the introduction. So I had objective 1, which was plan a written response assessment. And so, like all of the other types of assessments, they start with the assessment development cycle and the 4 planning steps for written responses. And so, step 1 is determining the purpose, so who's going to use the information. And for written responses, a lot of times it's for teachers to, diagnose student learning and for students to reflect on what they know. It can be used formatively in exams or research papers, those things to kind of give a grade, but it could also be used, or it could be summatively, and it could also be used formatively to kind of be a checkpoint for learning. So step 2 was specifying the intended learning targets. So making sure that we know what learning targets we are actually assessing with students so that we can, again, determine if they have accurately and effectively learned what they're supposed to learn. Step 3 was selecting the appropriate assessment method. And so the chapter talked about that this was a good fit for knowledge targets, and that reasoning targets were like a strong fit for written response assessment. So knowing that we are using the right types of assessments for these targets. And then step 4 was determining the appropriate sample size. I thought that was really interesting because it talked about, using the multiple choice that we talked about last week in the selected response and how that is quicker so you can have a bigger sample size, whereas written responses, because it takes longer to have students answer those, you may have a smaller sample size. So I thought that was important to note. And then it went into developing or selecting the items. So making sure that we design prompts carefully so that students are able to know what you're asking them so that they can showcase their knowledge. I thought that was something that was important for me to remember myself, and making sure that we are clear in our prompts, that we're brief, but that we are thorough in what we are saying is a good prompt. So all of those were aspects of planning a written response assessment.
Okay, and then I have objective 2, develop short answer and extended written response items. Developing short answer and extended written response items requires intentional alignment with clearly defined learning targets. As explained in Chapter 6, high quality written response assessments begin with identifying whether the target is knowledge level or reasoning level, and then designing prompts that accurately measure that specific target. Short answer items, the learning target is fairly narrow. Students are demonstrating conceptual understanding rather than broad sentences. The response can be completed in a few sentences. And then effective short answer prompts provide enough context to prevent confusion, clearly state what students must include. They avoid vague wording such as explain without specifying what to explain, and then they minimize opportunities for bluffing. For example, I'm asking, explain the carbon cycle. A stronger short answer prompt would be explain why the carbon cycle is important and describe one way carbon moves from one atmosphere to living organisms. This aligns with the chapter emphasis on clarity um, and preventing partial and or misleading responses. Extended written response items are appropriate when the learning target involves reasoning, analysis, evaluation, or synthesis. Students must demonstrate deeper understanding. Multiple components of reasoning are required. And then high quality extended response items set the context, identify the reasoning pattern, analyze, compare, excuse me, and then specify what a complete response must include. It also aligns with a scoring guide or rubric developed in advance. For example, analyze how industrialization affected both economic growth and environmental conditions during the late 19th century. Use at least two specific examples to support your analysis. This type of prompt requires interrogation of knowledge and reasoning, consistent with the chapter's guidance on designing items that assess more than recall. Um, and then, according to Chapter 6, effective written response assessments must, again, align with the learning targets, clearly communicate expectations, use scoring guides or rubrics, avoid bias, avoid a biased stance, and then be reviewed and refined before use. Additionally, scoring guides should be developed before administering the assessment to ensure consistency and fairness.
I had objective three, develop two types of scoring guides, checklists, and task specific rubrics. So when it comes to scoring written response assessments, we convey evaluative judgments about the quality of responses in terms of the number of points students attain. So a checklist is a scoring guide in the form of a checklist that identifies the possible correct responses or desired features of the response and specifies how points will be rewarded. Checklists are typically useful when the desired answer has several parts and each one represents a specific category of knowledge or reasoning with knowledge. The example in the text about the carbon cycle was a good example. It provided clear instructions and outlined the grading scale. So when creating a checklist, checklists are fairly easy to create. They describe the specific information or components necessary for a strong response. A good way to create a checklist is to follow the instructions for proposition development. Another way to create a checklist for scoring responses is to describe the features of a correct response and assign points to each. So, when sharing a checklist, the written response items that the students should receive should include information about how their work will be scored. In some cases, it is permissible to share the checklist as is, while in other cases, it isn't the best idea because the checklist can function as the answer key. Task specific rubrics. To develop a task specific rubric, we must first create a proposition, a sentence that accurately states the conceptual understanding. Next, we create statements representing partial understanding and misunderstandings, typical to the particular concept. Lastly, we transform these statements into rubric levels. For short answer and extended response items, assessing conceptual understanding that aren't too complex is best to use 3 levels. For more complex items, 4 levels are recommended. So when using the 3 levels, it's usually 2 points for the statement describing correct explanation of the concept, 1 point statements describing explanations demonstrating partial understanding, but not including foundational misconceptions, and 0 point statements describing explanations showing complete lack of understanding and or foundational misconceptions. So at level 4, which is also the recommended choice for extended response items, 3 points gets the statement describing correct explanation of the concept. 2 points is statements describing explanations demonstrating partial understanding and statement of a simple misunderstanding if appropriate. 1 point statements describing explanations showing partial understanding with some misunderstanding but no fatal flaw. And 0 points if the statement describing explanations showing complete lack of understanding and or foundational misconceptions. So when sharing task-specific rubrics, typically they can't be handed out to students in advance or along with the assessment items because they would defeat the purpose of a task-specific rubric because that's basically giving them the answers, which is similar to the answer key. They lay out exactly what the response needs to look out. Task-specific rubrics can be handed out after to allow students to understand their missteps.
So objective number 4 is audit a written response assessment for quality. There are different types of writing, such as arguments, narratives, etc. Most will think written response assessments showcase students' ability to produce quality text. But it's actually very limited in addressing students' content mastery. Voice, word choice, and fluency are things that fall into performance-based methodology, which is a better fit. When looking to refine an assessment, sometimes you will not catch all the problems, but there are two things to look for to improve them in the future. So, do students have enough time to complete the responses? If they don't, you can reduce the number of questions or increase their testing time. Secondly, do students ask for clarification on test items? It's important to think about those sorts of questions and revisit and revise those items to be more clear and direct. Overall, when we are going over these assessments, teachers must ensure that they have accuracy and consistency.
So, objective 5, use written response assessment formatively with students. So, in the first section, where am I going? It covers strategy 1 and 2. Strategy 1 provides students with clear and understandable vision of the learning target. So, with this, you give students a vision of their learning destination. Share your learning targets, objectives, or goals with them at the beginning of instruction or before they begin independent practice. Lastly, share a sample assessment blueprint with them. Strategy 2, use examples of strong and weak work. Invite students to participate in developing the scoring criteria for sample exercises. Give them an excellent response and a poor quality response to a past essay exercise and have them figure out the differences. Then have them score sample responses. Section 2, where am I now, includes strategies 3 and 4. Strategy 3, offer regular descriptive feedback during learning. Design written response assessments so that they can function as feedback to students. Ensure they are aware of the criteria that constitute quality and use the language of the rubric to provide strength and the next step feedback on their practice work. Strategy 4, teach students to self assess and set goals for the next steps. Have students predict their performance in each cell in the assessment blueprint and then compare their prediction to what their actual score is. And then section 3, how can I close the gap, which covers the last 3 strategies. Strategy 5, use evidence of student learning needs to determine next steps in teaching. So with this, examine students' responses to determine the cause of incorrect or low quality responses. Strategy 6, design focused instruction followed by practice with feedback. After delivering instruction targeted to an area of need, let students practice and get better. before reassessing and grading. Give them the opportunities to revise their responses based on feedback focused just on that area of need prior to the graded event. Lastly, strategy 7, provide opportunities for students to track, reflect on, and share their learning progress. Give students a list of misconceptions and design instruction to address the misconceptions. As students are able to correct each one, have them date the list and write the correct understanding. Set up a system for students to track their formative assessment information and their summative assessment information, organized by learning target. Periodically ask them to reflect on their progress.
So I had reflection question number one, which was which ideas did you find most convincing or useful and why? And I really was what hit me the most out of the chapter was making sure to create the assessment guidelines in advance because I do think it's easy to say, well, describe this and then like later on it be like, okay, well this person was a really good response and this one was okay and this one was not so good. Um and it was talking about the floating standards and how like if we don't tell students ahead of time then we're not creating quality assessment because they don't know what they're being graded on. So they, if you're looking for 4 reasons, like it said, for the fall of government, and you just say describe the fall, and they give you 1 reason, they may know the other 3 reasons, but you didn't ask them specifically to share it, so they didn't know that that's what you were grading them on. So I thought that was really important to remember to set students up for success and to provide those clarifying like roadmaps in the prompt. The other piece that, and it's probably just because that's where my brain's at, is talking about written response in regards to like students who are EL or not proficient in like the English language and how this isn't a good match for those students because my mom's an EL teacher. So I think that's just where my head's at, and having alternate assessments for those students. But then I was also thinking about it shouldn't stop us from using written assessments, but at least the students in my area, I feel like whether they're native English speakers or not, their writing and English standards are not up to grade level par. So is this a content issue where they don't know the content, or is this a lack of English skills in general? So that's something I thought of as well, is to like, as we're picking responses, not saying they shouldn't write, because we have a thing in each of our classrooms, like we're supposed to read, write, um, read, write, gosh, I forgot the third thing. Read, write, and something every single day. Talk, read, write, and speak every single day in every class. Um,
Mhm.
but knowing that like those writing skills that they should have picked up in elementary school or middle school by the time they get to high school, like we have to kind of make up for some of that and not necessarily grade them harshly on that when we're looking for other mastery of content. So
I think it's good that you said that when it comes to SEL learners. I know that's one like our struggles right now, and like and it's just across the board between sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. Like it's just like I like. Right, give me a little bit more. Explain. They have like a real hard time with that, but I feel like it's kind of like both. I feel like it is. Uh Continue to like move forward with your content and not stay on this because our SCL teacher here has like a hard time with just trying to make sure that those students are like upkept with what's current and not getting behind, but then to like the lack of scheduling and things of that nature, um or not even scheduling, just the mixture of schedules between their testing, we testing, small group day. It's just like a whole lot, but that was really good. Of course, I have reflection two. How does this chapter align with or challenge your own beliefs about teaching and learning? Of course, this chapter strongly aligns with my belief that assessment should be purposeful, transparent, and student centered. I have always believed that learning should go beyond memorization. And within chapter six, it reinforces that written response assessments are powerful tools for measuring reasoning, analysis, and conceptual understanding. One belief this chapter affirms is that students need clarity and expectations. Assessment should reflect the intended learning, and then feedback should guide growth, not just assigned grades. The chapter's emphasis on developing scoring guides and advanced challenges a common tendency to grade with pure intention. It highlights the importance of structured rubrics to reduce bias and improve consistency. This also reinforces the idea that fairness in grading is not automatic, it must be intentionally designed. Additionally, the formative use of written response assessment aligns deeply with my philosophy of teaching. The strategies for helping students understand learning targets, self assesses, and reflect on their progress support a growth mindset and ownership of learning. However, the chapter also challenges me to be more deliberate. It pushes me to avoid vague prompts, be more precise within my wording, anticipate misconceptions, and design assessments that truly measure reasoning rather than writing ability alone. Overall, this chapter strengthens my belief that the assessment is not just a measurement tool, it is a teaching tool. When designed intentionally, written response assessments can deepen understanding, promote critical thinking, and provide meaningful feedback that moves learning forward.
Excuse me. Reflection three is which strategy or idea from this chapter would you feel most confident in implementing and why? A strategy from this chapter I would feel most confident in implementing would be to teach students about teach students to self-assess and set goals for next steps. Letting students grade themselves based on rubrics of scoring evaluations are a good way for them to reflect on themselves fairly and get them involved in this process. I could also reverse this process and have the students develop their own rubrics based on tests or assessments. They are able to think about how to categorize their learning topics and what should be counted as fairly correct or fairly incorrect based on the question type. Having students break down the steps in identifying their goals helps them build their knowledge gradually, and at the end of the process, they have a very clear path on how to get to their goals. As a middle school teacher, I have been successful in being able to break down topics slash projects into daily objectives, which in my experience so far has helped students to learn important subjects I want them to know in a more routine and clear way.
A reflection for what part of this chapter makes you feel uncertain, nervous, or hesitant about applying in practice. And I put nothing really makes me feel uncertain, nervous, or hesitant about applying in practice. My only big thing about this chapter was that because I'm not actively teaching in my licensing area, I'm not able to practice this method because my students are 4 and 5 years old, so they're barely writing their name. So I was unsure about how this will go when I move up into my licensing area because I don't use it. So it's like going in kind of blindly. You don't know how I react or how my students, future students, will react to certain questions like this.
I think that's interesting. Um, I feel like because you do have pre-K toddler age, um, I think because they are developing like the emotional aspects of their being and stuff like that, and like learning how to like communicate their thoughts and their feelings, although they may not be like super big to us or they're minute to us, but super big to them. I just think that teaches them like a level of They're like self-awareness in some form or another, but
Mhm.
I feel like that's good. But I could see that. And then I'm closing this out. That's it. That's we got one more. I'm closing this out. Closing this out. Okay. All right. So in closing, Chapter 6 enforces that written response assessment is far more than simply asking students to write about it. When thoughtfully designed, short answer and extended response items become powerful tools for uncovering what students truly understand and how they reason. This chapter highlights the importance of aligning prompts with learning targets, developing scoring guides in advance, and ensuring clarity in both expectations and evaluation. What stands out the most is that the reminder that the assessment should be intentional. Vague questions produce vague thinking, but well crafted prompts encourage depth, precision, and meaningful engagement. The chapter also emphasizes fairness and consistency through the use of rubrics and checklists, ensuring that grading reflects student understanding rather than subjective impressions. Perhaps most importantly, Chapter 6 frames written response assessment as a formative opportunity, not just a summative judgment. When students understand the target, see models, receive feedback, and engage in self assessment, written responses become a pathway for growth rather than simply a grade in the grade book. Ultimately, this chapter challenges educators to design assessments that truly measure thinking. When done well, written response assessments tap in deeper learning, strengthen reasoning skills, and help bridge the gap between instruction and understanding. And that closes out chapter 6. That was